You know, when it comes to single-player JRPGs, I firmly believe that gatekeeping is a good thing. Fake fans diluting a hardcore series with accessibility options and casual modes leads to nothing but... Huh? Who could that be? Don't they know I'm recording a manifesto here?
How's it going, neighborino?
Oh my gosh, if it isn't Fire Emblem 1, the game that defined turn-based strategy with light RPG elements. I haven't played you in so long, how are you doing?
Doing great, Choops. You're so wildly successful now. I just wanted to stop by and make sure you didn't forget all the fun times we had in the past.
Oh, of course not. I love calculating hit rates on pen and paper. Make yourself at home. How's life on the eShop?
Heyo! Sorry for showing up unannounced. Just hitched a ride on the coattails of Fire Emblem 1 and thought I'd see what's up.
Fire Emblem 3? No need for apologies. I always love revisiting an underrated classic that streamlined the esoteric mechanics of its predecessors. Don't be shy, come on in.
Hey Fire Emblem 1, how's life on the eShop?
How's life without Riss?
Are you guys throwing a party and forgot to invite me?
Tearing Saga?
Choops, remember when you said that I was the best Fire Emblem for beginners to start with?
Well, you know me. When it comes to YouTube clicks, I'm kind of a shameless whore.
Did somebody say horsey war?
Well, if it isn't literally the greatest game ever made, Fire Emblem 4.
Choopy, thank you so much for tricking so many people into playing me. I hope you don't mind if I brought my boyfriend.
Thracia 776, using the front door. What happened? Did his warp staff miss? Oh well, no harm in one more. I suppose it's already a party.
It ain't a party until we start dancing. Come on, Choopy, together we ride.
Put your hands up. Go Choopy, go Choopy, go Choopy, go Choopy, go Choopy, go Choopy, go.
Oh my God. Who is that? I'm Shozo Kaga's penis. Ride me! Okay! How is up? I'm Choopy Choosy. Back in the clack, and welcome to my review of Tearing Saga series, Berwick Saga, Lesberia Chronicle, Chapter 174, a game most known for being the brainchild of former Fire Emblem designer Shozo Kaga. While it never released stateside, it has the distinction of actually outselling its contemporary, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, in Japan. But let's skip the pleasantries and get right into answering the big question everyone's here for. Is Berwick Saga good? I want you to think about the extreme pressure you're placing me under in answering that absurdly reductive question. I am the first and only person online who has yet to make a proper Berwick Saga review video. I am alone in bearing the burden of shaping the narrative of this game, sowing the seeds of social media discourse for future generations of gamers who will never actually play it for themselves. I owe it to them to get this right. So I need to choose my next few words very carefully. Berwick Saga is a game for Fire Emblem fans who are destined to end up in the electric chair. It's a dark, interdimensional anomaly that'll use its demon blade to squeeze and corrupt your insides while it leaves you clinging to life at exactly 1 HP. For narrative reasons. But that doesn't mean it's not a good game, because I think it is, and really, that's all that matters. Still, as the thumbnail of this video tastefully implicates, Berwick Saga is an absolutely ruthless experience. In fact, it's probably the hardest turn-based game I've ever played, and I'm honestly conflicted whether or not I should be recommending this to other adult human beings. To support these claims, I've isolated the two main reasons I feel leads to Berwick Saga's initial difficulty. 1. There is absolutely no dissonance between its gameplay systems and its narrative. Every mechanic is designed to be as representational and realistic as possible to a level that, while incredible, is also impractical for a video game. 2. It's not Fire Emblem. If you're confused, I completely understand. A game not being Fire Emblem sounds like the most narrow-minded and sheltered critique of anything ever. Most games aren't Fire Emblem. In fact, most Fire Emblem games aren't Fire Emblem. But I promise, this will make sense after I tell you this very real personal anecdote that absolutely did happen in real life to a real boy, who coincidentally was me. Let me take you back to my first experience playing Fire Emblem. It was 2006. Ricky Martin's Living La Vida Loca was topping the Billboard charts, and the scars of 9/11 were still fresh in the minds of every pure-blooded patriot. I was a 6-year-old baby genius attending State University. One of my peers graciously left his GameCube in the common area of our dorms. He mostly did it so we'd be forced to play his favorite casual party game with him. But he also had a selection of other games. Being a fan of the role-playing genre, I remember distinctly popping in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and giving it a spin between classes. I played for about an hour or so before being disrupted by my dorm mate. He coyly inquired what I thought of the game. I replied, "This game sucks. It's just a watered-down Final Fantasy Tactics." And I never played Fire Emblem again. The reason why I'm telling you this story is to not only showcase how wrong I was, but to also demonstrate how we as humans are only bound by our own formative experiences. Fire Emblem isn't a watered-down version of Final Fantasy Tactics, it's just a completely different game. But at the time, it was the most adjacent experience my brain connected with Fire Emblem because of my surface-level observation that both of these games took place on a grid. Thus, the specious lens I used to manufacture my own rational order to dismiss something that I just simply couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why some of my characters were so much more powerful than others. I couldn't understand what the point of speed was in a game where you move all of your units at once. I couldn't understand how characters could freely trade and equip multiple weapon types during a battle. I couldn't understand when not all of my stats went up every time I gained a level. And I couldn't understand why Cloud wasn't a secret unlockable character. Despite being a baby genius, I was still a baby. A dumb, stupid baby who regularly pooped in their diaper. In the same way that Fire Emblem is not Final Fantasy Tactics, Berwick Saga is not Fire Emblem. I'm emphasizing this because I'm very confident that 100% of the people who are potentially interested in playing this game are only compelled by Berwick Saga's legacy and connection to Fire Emblem. But they have no idea what they're getting themselves into, and I'm here to warn them. It would be irresponsible if I didn't. If you play Berwick Saga like Fire Emblem, you will die. Stay tuned for more of the Berwick Saga Holiday Review Spectacular, right here on the Choops channel. But what do I mean by playing like Fire Emblem? Well, my personal definition is simply the habits and expectations that players form from their prolonged exposure to and learned experiences with the Fire Emblem series. Let's start with hub worlds. If you've played any of the recent Fire Emblem games, you probably know them as the casual break between chapters where you organize your inventory, watch supports, apply stat boosters, gather resources, and drink sweet, sweet dog milk. While these sections do offer some strategic decision-making that will impact your gameplay, like the professor points in Fire Emblem Three Houses, they're largely inconsequential if you just do the bare minimum and breeze through them. There's so much room for error that some players straight up ignore the shiny objects scattered about the hub world, simply because the time invested needed to accrue them all isn't worth the effort. Nor does the game really penalize you for doing so. You either spend the time interacting with these aspects of the hub world to get all the resources they provide, or you leave them on the table. That's it. It's not really a strategic choice. It could be replaced with an automatic give me all my stuff button, and the only thing that would change is the amount of time you spend forcing a dog to shit gems. Berwick Saga also has its own hub world, which is represented in the trade city of Navarone. Except in this hub world, what you do and what you don't do in it is both a weighted consideration and has extreme repercussions. As the story follows a band of knights stuck on the losing side of a desperate war, with no outside support, money becomes very inconsistent. Even if you manage to build up a stockpile of funds, you can still go broke so quickly that you'll be cursing this game's anti-consumer practices while your horses develop eating disorders. Obviously, having fewer resources is one way to make the player's choices feel more weighted. But Berwick Saga goes a step beyond just asking you to be more frugal with your sword shopping, because money also facilitates unit recruitment. Outside of the main character and a few close retainers, the rest of the units in this game need to be paid for their deployment separately in every single chapter. Sure, over time, these units can be recruited permanently, and their deployment will no longer be a strain on the player's funds. But this can only happen if a hidden threshold of happiness is met. This threshold is specific to each unit, but it generally just boils down to regularly fielding them, or fielding characters they have a deep relationship with. This creates situations where you need to consider not only the price of the unit's scaled hiring fee, but also if their deployment is going to contribute to a long-term goal of them permanently joining your army. Due to there only being one main mission per chapter, followed by a few side missions, it can actually be more cost efficient to not hire the best units at the start of the chapter, since their asking price is reduced after completing the main mission. In a similar token, there's a food system that takes the form of the Kingfisher Pavilion, but like everything else in this hub world, it costs money to utilize. It can be in your best interest to not feed your units, or to only enter the pavilion with a few select members in your active party, so you can feed unhired mercenaries you plan on recruiting for side missions later. Feeding your units more expensive foods they have an affinity for is a great way to build happiness, give passive stat bonuses, and sometimes even a temporary skill, but it's also a great way to go absolutely broke. There are actual strategic advantages to abstaining from all the options Berwick Saga presents to you in its hub world. Unlike Fire Emblem, Berwick Saga's hub world serves as much of an integral part of the game's global macro management strategy as the actual gameplay itself. It's not just a cosmetic venue for ogling child soldiers. The hypothetical "give me all my stuff" button wouldn't work in Berwick Saga, just like how auto-battling a map wouldn't work in Fire Emblem. Once you grasp the loop of hiring and recruitment, it's actually stunning how these design choices integrate into gameplay. Every unit in this game has a unique utility role, and each map is meticulously crafted to leverage these roles. That's why the hiring mechanic works out so well, since the set of tools you need is always at your disposal, regardless of how long they've been on the bench. If there's a map with fog of war, hire the dude with extended night vision. Dealing with archers perched on cliffs? You gotta go Kramer. And if you need to walk on water, seek Jesus!
I'm giving up to God! I'm a God warrior!
It may seem implausible that so many units can remain relevant without a restriction like fatigue or forced deployment, but Berwick Saga excels at organically leveling the playing field and cultivating an economy where switching up your roster is more advantageous than focusing exclusively on a core team. Growth rates are incredibly low. If even 2 stats increase during a unit's level, you're going to be telling them things like,
I'm gonna suck your cock, bro. I'm going to literally unzip your pants and suck your cock.
but honestly, it's not even worth getting excited about growth rates in this game. For a clearer example, let's take a look at this graph. The highest defense growth in the game is 18%. Yeah. And there's a bracketing system that ensures that most characters cannot exceed or trail too far beyond their expected stat growth for their level. Experience from combat is only gained from killing enemies, and acquisition is so throttled for overleveled characters that they'll stop gaining experience from most enemies under their level. Also, units that are unhired will gain experience passively until they cap at 99 XP. All of these mechanisms work in tandem to not only ensure that no single unit eclipses the intended challenge, but also that the units you haven't deployed in a while can still come back to perform a needed utility and contribute in a meaningful way. To me, it's evident that these design choices were conceived by empirical observations of how players commonly broke the intended difficulty of Fire Emblem. Berwick Saga tackles these issues by removing Fire Emblem's most notoriously exploited mechanics, such as warp staffs, changing equipped weapons via battle trades, excessive avoid modifiers, and dancers, as well as limiting players to only one flying unit. Basically, in contrast to other Fire Emblem games, Berwick Saga cannot be cheesed, and this may pose a challenge to players who rely on the series' more exploitative quirks, whether they realize it or not. One of Fire Emblem's most appealing aspects is its extensive lineup of playable characters, in which the player will inevitably gravitate towards a few individuals, develop a strong preference for them, and heavily favor their use throughout the game. Having a core team and using them on every map, building up their stats and abilities so that they're consistently surpassing any threshold of difficulty the game may present, will always make the game easier than attempting to make use of the entire roster. It's what convinces some professional tier list artists into believing their best girl is comparatively superior to everyone else, when in reality, they tailored all of their gameplay around that character's success. Because the map objectives don't really ask for anything more than to be able to kill things and not die, it intermediates that style of play. Thus, the player's determination will always pay off. Don't take this the wrong way, because this is not a bad thing at all. It allows anyone to use any character they want on their terms, and it validates the choice not just as a form of self-expression, but as a viable method of play. In a way, using whomever you want and still being successful is what makes Fire Emblem so accessible in the first place. But Berwick Saga is not Fire Emblem. The map design of Berwick Saga challenges the player to consider unit deployment beyond simply asking, is this unit good in combat? And it achieves this through dynamic scenarios with multiple objectives that encourage more specialized solutions. That's not to say you can't focus on a few units like you would in Fire Emblem, but there's going to be many situations that'll prove to be extremely difficult if you don't field units that can properly handle what the maps throw at you. The enemy formations, stats, skills, and weapon compositions are just too varied for a small core team to handle effectively. Before we continue, there's one more learned habit of Fire Emblem players that does not translate to Berwick Saga: turtling. Turtling involves moving all of your units as a big, sweaty blob of pixelated Granfaloon anime flesh, slowly towards the objective, with the strongest units at the front to bait the enemy towards them, so that you can overwhelm them on your player phase. While there are moments in Berwick Saga where you do want to consolidate your units, you'll find that the vast majority of scenarios put you in situations where you're going to be spread out or divided into groups, not just because of deployment placement, but because it's simply in your best advantage to do so. Baiting in general is not really effective, since dealing damage cancels any retaliation. Furthermore, there's no enemy or player phase. It's all merged into one big turn, meaning you can't bait and dogpile, and you can't move all of your units at once. The merged turn system is probably the hardest aspect for Fire Emblem players to wrap their heads around, but it's also the most satisfying to master. And once I did, I realized how inherently flawed the two-phase turn system of Fire Emblem is. It's crazy how people on the internet still make the joke that Fire Emblem is just anime chess. But I don't move all my pieces at once in chess. And I don't have fun watching anime. The only reason why cheese strats like turtling are even possible in the first place is that you are literally able to move all of your units as a blob at one time without any immediate repercussions. There's no question it works, but comparatively, it feels non-committal and way less dynamic. The merged turn system rectifies all of this by alternating turns between individual enemy and player units, and it's generated by the ratio of how many units are on the field. There's no stat that will determine turn order. You can move any unit you want once per phase, and the phase always starts with you moving first. This creates a system where the order of which units you choose to move is as important as where you move them. For instance, if the enemy is in range of delivering a potentially fatal blow, you'd want to move a frontline unit first to neutralize that threat. But in a turn where you want to advance your whole army, it's actually advantageous to move your backliners first, so that the enemy will waste their turn advancing towards you. If you strategize the order, you can make huge plays, and essentially move a single unit twice, by moving them last at the end of the phase, and then moving them first at the start of the next phase. Do you see how this game isn't Fire Emblem yet? It's so much deeper than just squares versus hexagons. I cannot stress this enough. I'm not drawing these comparisons just to make underhanded jabs at Fire Emblem. I just legitimately believe that disassociating Berwick Saga from Fire Emblem is going to help a lot of people appreciate a brutally difficult game. Fire Emblem fans, I'm not trying to brainwash you. I'm merely trying to wash your brain. Think of it as wiping the walls out between Berwick Saga and your own self-afflicted degeneracy, which is exactly what I did for myself in preparation to play this game. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared that I was aimlessly streaming a random selection of weeb games while binge drinking every night for over a year as a way to escape from the reality of my failed career as a Fire Emblem YouTuber. However, I was secretly conditioning myself in a strict regimen to prepare for the ultimate challenge that is Tearing Saga series Berwick Saga Lesberia Chronicle Chapter 174. Each game I completed further reprogrammed my brain away from the established mechanics of Fire Emblem and imparted an important lesson that I would unknowingly need to utilize in order to surmount Berwick's many daunting challenges. Soul Crest had taught me that seemingly burdensome and overwhelming mechanics are sometimes the most fulfilling to master. Revival Xanadu Easy Mode made me accept the possibility of total failure and to take solace in the journey of a learned experience. Mirrors instilled in me that humanity's hubris is its belief in its own free will. GGLS 3 showed me that tenacity and luck are a potent combo in the face of a hopeless situation. Senjin Alest versed me in the idea that difficulty can always be mitigated by simply better learning the fundamentals of the game. Path of the Midnight Sun illuminated to me that the best games are those that subvert expectations. Much like how main protagonist Reen Schwarzer grooms his students, the Trails of Cold Steel games groomed me into understanding how constant narrative dissonances can actively damage the impact of a game's storytelling. Final Fantasy VII New Threat Mode B enlightened me that play systems can have even more meaning when they're iterated, refined, and thoughtfully balanced. And Ys 4, The Dawn of Ys, educated me that sometimes it takes many flawed attempts of an idea, and maybe even a fresh set of minds and circumstances, to accumulate into what is a fully actualized masterwork. You'd think that with all this regimented preparation, I'd be able to crush any challenge Berwick Saga threw at me. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The sad truth is no amount of preparation can steel you for Berwick Saga. And as a result of my own selfish desire to simply see the credits, I performed one of the most contemptible, unspeakable sins in all of gaming. I used save states. And I would honestly recommend anyone playing this game their first time to not restrict themselves from doing the same. As long as you're not completely relying on it in place of actually learning the mechanics, then it's fine. Sure, it is nice that this game has a 5-turn save system. Pushing select and start lets you quickly reload, and those reloads will reset and re-roll the RNG. But if you're playing blind, as I always recommend doing, you're probably going to need all the extra help you can get, especially when you're locked into the last third of this game. You might take that statement and expect Berwick Saga to be similar to other Fire Emblem games, where the difficulty comes from just not being aware of the curveballs the maps will throw at you. But it isn't. Remember, Berwick Saga is not Fire Emblem. On the contrary, one of Berwick Saga's strengths is how straightforward its objectives are. It clearly tells you who and what is needed to complete both the main and side missions, and the cutscenes strongly hint as to who you could deploy to trigger optional dialogue and story content. No, my motivation for recommending new players to not feel bad about using save states is that a lot of this game's difficulty comes down to its combat system just being very RNG heavy. More than any game I've ever played. Sometimes it feels like it's in the same weight class as Mario Party and Go Fish. This takes me back to my first bullet point as to why Berwick Saga is so difficult, which I conveniently never elaborated on. There is absolutely no dissonance between its gameplay systems and its narrative. Every mechanic is designed to be as representational and realistic as possible to a level that, while incredible, is also impractical for a video game. Berwick's #1 goal is to create an immersive, gritty simulation of fantasy warfare, complete with high stakes and grounded human struggles. Every mechanic is in service of this goal, first and foremost. This means that certain tropes one might expect to find in a video game are not present here. There is no roast chicken embedded in the foundation of a 1,000-year-old castle. There are no scripted death scenes in the same universe where Phoenix Downs can be purchased at your local bodega. There is no need to forget abilities, so you can make room in your brain for new ones. And there is no game of rock, paper, scissors to determine whether your attack will hit. Some would call these abstract concepts video gamey. because they require the player to suspend their disbelief and can be dissonant from whatever story the game is trying to tell. But I think that most people who aren't pedants would agree they're fine, if not necessary in most cases, since they effectively communicate and simplify mechanics in a medium that's meant to placate a wide variety of players. But Berwick Saga attempts to abstract absolutely nothing. It's a game that takes the term strategy war simulation and does not compromise for anyone. This is an admirable design philosophy, but the byproduct is that many of the mechanics are obtuse and lack any immediate feedback. That's not to say that all of the mechanics that strive to be representationally realistic of war are excessive. In fact, after playing this game multiple times, it feels like a lot of Berwick's innovations should have always been a part of strategy nomenclature, like bows consuming arrows as their own resource, and horses having their own health bars and stat bonuses. In fact, my favorite innovation is how weapon ranks are tied to a character's level. I've always found it jarring that a character who, let's say, has dedicated their entire life to the sword is somehow unable to wield a weapon just because it's made out of steel and not iron. Berwick Saga addresses this dissonance and gives units the ability to use equipable items before their required level, with the caveat of not being able to use any of the weapon's additional properties, as well as a 5% chance of failure for each level they're under the intended weapon's rank. This gives the player more options with how they can utilize their equipment with less than ideal inventories. There are tons of unique weapons in this game, and a few are bound to specific units as a personal, but many of them can still be used by anyone else in your army, and with a high enough level or passive skill, they can even be used without penalty. I really appreciate how these details balance the often disappointing stat gains from level ups by still presenting a tangible incentive to gain levels. I also like how the modifier for weapon hit rate or weapon skill is tied to specific weapon types. Not only that, but the chance to gain a point in that weapon's hit rate is rolled not just on level ups, but every single time it's used in combat, making weapon hit rate growth very easy to gain, and a huge factor of a unit's long-term viability. There are even hit rates for how often shields block damage, which again is much more narratively consistent than simply being an accessory that raises your defense by a static amount. As a master of medieval weaponry, I can state from experience that in the real world, shields may or may not deflect strikes depending on the skill of the user, so giving them their own hit rate represents that perfectly. However, what makes combat feel overtly punishing is that there are so many of these representational mechanics happening at once that even the outcome of a single battle can feel utterly unpredictable. Let's go over just one round of combat. You roll your hit rate against 3 types of potential avoid rates, with 3 different weapon range types that cannot counter each other. Then the enemy rolls their shield rate, which if successful, will alter the damage dealt. If you connect an attack, then combat stops. But if you miss or don't deal damage through the shield, then the enemy has the chance to attack you back, but only if their weapon range type is the same as yours. But if the enemy misses, and your attack speed is greater than theirs, then you have one more chance to attack them before the round ends. You also need to consider critical damage being a random number between 10 and 20, multi-hit weapons, variable damage from sphere momentum, and daggers, or the fact there's a weapon durability system that only gives you a vague indication of how many uses the weapon has based on color. And there's an ever-present, ever-increasing random chance that in the middle of combat, your weapon will just instantly explode! As you can see, much of the difficulty comes down to just how much potential random shit can happen during even one round of combat, and the challenge is to mitigate that as much as possible. This makes the probable outcome really hard to distinguish at first. Combat consistently feels like a gamble for the first few chapters, due to low base weapon hit rate, and most of your units having only single-digit skill modifiers. You're going to be swinging a lot of 60 to 70% for a good portion of the game, and because this game is not Fire Emblem, those are the actual hit rates. Stacking the RNG in your favor and minimizing as much risk as you can is the strategy of this game. Food modifiers and clever use of active and passive skills can help with that, and the outcomes of battles becomes much more dependable as the tools in your arsenal and your army grow. Basically, if your strategy is sound enough, you can still be successful even if a few rounds of combat don't go your way. See, it's not that bad. But unfortunately, it actually is that bad, because I forgot to mention cripple status. All weapons have a single-digit percentage chance to disarm the opponent after dealing damage. This is known as injury status, which really isn't that bad in itself. It's only -10 avoid, it can be recovered by fully healing, and you can still participate in combat as long as you just re-equip a weapon on your next turn. However, injury status increases the chances of being afflicted with the dreaded cripple status, a status that will leave you unable to participate in combat, reduce your movement to a random fraction of its original state, make all of your friends laugh at you, and leave your unit susceptible to being captured and abducted off the battlefield completely. Outside of one healer's personal tome and a very limited potion, cripple status cannot be cured, and if you end the map with the status, that unit will not be able to participate in combat for the rest of the chapter. Oh, and one more thing. Cripple status can occur even if the unit isn't injured. Basically, the likelihood of it happening increases depending on how much damage is done in a single round of combat and how close the unit is to 1 HP. It's a brutal forfeiture for something that's so difficult to control. It can happen at any time. Prior to Berwick, the most comparable mechanic to this was capture in Thracia 776, which cut your stats in half while you attempted to reduce the enemy to 0 HP. If we're being honest, Thracia doesn't represent the act of abducting a person in combat realistically. It works brilliantly as a mechanic, don't get me wrong, because it makes the act of capturing an actual choice you can plan around. Capturing in Berwick makes a lot more sense narratively. Injuries aren't something you ever plan to have happen. I didn't plan to have a concussion on my skateboard. But representing that in a simulation means the result is going to be completely random. Outside of wasting time save scumming, you can't force cripple status, which is going to be a hard pill to swallow since capturing enemies is highly incentivized with all the optional rewards you get from doing so. You're even able to collect extra ransom money for captured soldiers. But at the end of the day, injury and cripple are just circumstances that should be leveraged if the opportunity presents itself. Trying to force it by abusing saves will ultimately make the game more frustrating. Likewise, if it happens to any of your units, you'll need to adjust your strategy to deal with it. It's an unwieldy mechanic for sure, and it probably doesn't help that the cripple status is programmed to be more likely to happen to you rather than the enemy. This is war. Shit happens, and part of strategy is not just following through with a conceptual plan, but continually adapting and modifying it as the conditions of the scenario evolve. Despite how seemingly impractical the commitment to narrative harmony is, and how that's going to turn off a lot of people, once you get past all that, everything still manages to just work for some reason. It's a ruthlessly difficult game for sure, but it's also a fair game. And I don't want to oversell it as some sort of Super Thracia H5 reverse lunatic level of BS, because it's not. Outside of the cripple equation, the enemy operates on the same rules as your units. Even the notorious fog of war is fixed, so that the enemy also can't see you outside of their view range. And if you want to see which one of your units is hidden from enemy view, just push the select button. It also shows your HP. It sounds crazy to even say that fog of war maps are my favorite parts of this game. But that's just what simulated turn-based warfare can do to a man. I can only speak for myself, but I had fun playing T-Ring Saga series Berwick Saga Lesbiria Chronicle Chapter 174. It's quickly become one of my favorite games ever. I played it 3 times in a row on my own volition. I haven't done that with a game since Thracia 776, and that's pretty much going to give you a read on who's going to think this game is a masterpiece. Boomers. But honestly, if you are someone who thinks that the possibility of missing a 97% hit chance is bad game design, you're going to hate this game. For others, it's going to be an enlightening insight into the alternative future of what Fire Emblem could have been had Shozo Kaga stayed at the series' helm. If you're not aware of the significance of that name, I'm going to sum up about 20 Fire Emblem YouTube videos in about 5 sentences. Shozo Kaga was the planner, designer, and scenarist of Fire Emblem 1, and the director of Fire Emblem 2 through 5. He is regarded as the father of all strategy RPGs, and is most known for his commitment to both refining and completely reinventing the mechanics of each subsequent game in the series. For some undocumented reason, he leaves Nintendo and its subsidiary Intelligent Systems. He makes his next game independently on the PlayStation, and Nintendo sues him because the game he made is literally Fire Emblem. Personally, if I were Nintendo in that situation, I would have sued Kaga too, even though I have a lot of better things to do.
Hello, and welcome back to Video Games. Tim Rogers here with the 26-hour action button review of Super Mario Bros. 2, Mario Madness. not to be confused with Super Mario Bros. 2, best known amongst English-speaking folk as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Originally released in North America as part of the Super Mario All-Stars remake compilation for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System on Wednesday, August 11th, 1993. Did you know that Super Mario Bros. 2 Mario Madness is called Doki Doki Panic in Japanese? We could roughly translate that title to Thumpy Pumpy Bingo! Trust me, I speak fluent Japanese. Choops. Stop giving into your depression and finish making your video. I hate to break it to you, buddy. She's never coming back. You need to focus on things you can actually control in your life. Because let's face it, this video needs emergency surgery. Like, we're 34 minutes into this car accident, and you've only just now started talking about Kagashozo? Crikey. Listen, Choops. If you don't produce the best Berwick Saga review of all time, I will. And trust me, you don't want that to happen. Oh, by the way, Choops. Don't forget to heal Colm with Molder.
Kaga wins the lawsuit, so Nintendo files an appeal, but this time with new evidence that Kaga distributed promotional material that explicitly stated that his game is connected to the characters of Fire Emblem and other intellectual properties that he did not own. Nintendo wins the appeal, and Kaga is forced into paying royalties to Nintendo. Now, there's a common theory behind the reason why Berwick Saga is such a drastic departure from Fire Emblem. Kaga was prioritizing his own self-preservation and deliberately made Berwick Saga as different from Fire Emblem as he could, just to preemptively dodge Daddy Nintendo's lawyer laser and avoid another lawsuit. And there is some merit to that theory. I mean, when you don't even have your name in the credits of your own fucking game, I don't know what other vibe I get from that besides, I'm trying to lay low and I don't want to go to prison. It's a narrative that's probably not true, but it's kind of fun, and it follows the idea that works of genius are sometimes the product of undesirable circumstances, that innovation can happen simply out of the necessity to work around a limitation. After all, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of being cool. But I think that's all bullshit. In my mind, Berwick Saga is just too deliberately constructed for its inception to merely be the product of lawsuit evasion. And I think that this narrative undermines all the heart and soul that clearly went into this game. Before Berwick Saga, Shozo Kaga did have a habit of revisiting his pre-established ideas, but he also had already shown that he could completely separate himself from those standards and produced bold deviations of the genre, like Fire Emblem Gaiden and Genealogy of the Holy War. So the question still remains, is Berwick Saga good? The truth is, Berwick Saga is far from perfect. It has questionable UI choices that make battle prep unnecessarily cumbersome, to the point of it conflicting with the flow and design of its hiring mechanics. Its turn system can create brutally unfair instances where you're only able to move once while the enemy can move 4 times in a row. The story, while ambitious with fantastic dialogue and plenty of insightful moments of character development told through unlockable side vignettes, still gives the impression of being incomplete, as if it's just a side story in a more all-encompassing epic tale that was never made. It would be like if you were to play Thracia 776 without the context of experiencing Genealogy of the Holy War first. If I were to make a list of the most important characters in the story of Berwick Saga, the main character Reese would barely break the top 10. In one way, it's refreshing to have a grounded perspective, where the fate of the world doesn't just rest on one person. But in another way, it feels like a lot of the main conflict just kinda happens without you off screen, while you and your ragtag friends rescue horses and abduct women with nets. Despite all this, and despite me knowing that a lot of people are going to be turned off by its commitment to narrative consistency, Tearing Saga series, Berwick Saga, Lasberia Chronicle Chapter 174 is a brilliant game, where success is not measured by hard numbers, but a continuously learned understanding of its massively multi-layered scope. The density of both its storytelling and mechanics requires a commitment of multiple playthroughs to appreciate its full breadth. To me, that commitment is 100% warranted. because in line with most of the best games I've ever played, Berwick Saga just gets more fun on subsequent playthroughs. This is the only game I've ever played that truly feels like it deserves the moniker of strategy simulation RPG. The map design is absolutely phenomenal and the most consistently inspiring I've ever experienced in the genre. Almost every single scenario presents you with several avenues to approach the objectives in a way that always leaves you with a feeling of accomplishment, accompanied by an in-game economy that makes every decision feel that much more tangibly impactful. The units you hire based on their immediate utility, the units you abstain from hiring to benefit your long-term resources, the optional side missions, bounties, and citizens' requests all contribute to a venue of genuine strategy that is constantly pushing the player to challenge themselves beyond simply seizing a throne. While Berwick Saga is not Fire Emblem, its ambition is the product of Fire Emblem. Ambition that leverages both its complete defiance of the genre's expectations as well as its pedigree as a refined, iterative work. Wow, that was a crazy video. But unfortunately, it's also going to be my last video ever. That's over 16 minutes long. But before we go, there's a few people I have to acknowledge. First and foremost, I have to thank every single one of these Patreon members. Even from the start, the idea of attempting to make this video was incredibly overwhelming to me, and I'm positive, without a community of people to bounce ideas off of, showcase my progression, get feedback, and generally poop around with, I would not have been able to muster the confidence to see this project through to fruition. So to everyone in the Patreon server, genuinely, thank you. Thank you to Pizza Bagel for helping me with basically everything, but most of all co-writing the script of this video. It's much funnier and betterer because of you. Also, thanks for talking me into playing this game in the first place. Thank you to my assistant editor, Rockman, for painstakingly getting all of the gameplay footage for this video. Thank you, Mr. Chip, for your ETA-focused Engage footage. Thank you to the official channel artist, Algie, for all the official channel art. Thank you to Mute Muso for translating the manual of Berwick Saga, which I'll leave a link to in the description. My video is not a guide by any means, but her work with this document should help a lot of people understand the mechanics for maximum enjoyment. Thank you, Chris, for CDI Sigurd. Thank you, iKelv, Mr. Chip, Oni Spumoni, and Jasu Bakuhatsu for video and script feedback. Thanks, Katamaro, for the wrist portrait edits. Thank you, Multi-Band Compressors, for saving this video from my horrible recording oversights. Thank you, Fairgast, Lucky Crit, Mecha, and Speedy Hawk for lending their voices to their favorite games. Thank you, Tim Rogers, for reaching out and asking to be part of this video. Your thoughts and enthusiasm were a driving force that motivated me to make this video good. Thank you to all the Berwick big brains and streamers like Windsweep, Mishyman, Dota, Leadbeard, Dick Dug, and General Cervantes who helped me develop my script through their insight and passion of the game. Here's all the music I used! And if someone in the comments section asks, what music did you use at this point in the video? Give them the wrong timestamp for this list. It'll be funny, and it will make them comment twice, which means double the interaction for this video. Thank you to Ethan for your general encouragement and help, but mostly for your work with the English translation of Berwick Saga. None of us would be able to enjoy this masterpiece without you. And I'd also like to thank you for joining me on another quest to discover the mysteries of the Emblem. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, y'all, stay frothy.